So the Israelites are on the run, finally free from Egypt. In chapter 12, we had the Passover, so the actual escape. In chapter 13, we had God speaking with Moses and sharing how these momentous events would be passed down from one generation to the next. Now we are back into the action, and we catch up with the Israelites as they begin to set a trap for Pharaoh. This is fascinating, and it's something that we perhaps tend to overlook when reading the Exodus account. God's plan was not just to deliver his people, but to destroy their enemies. And so to do that, he's now going to draw Pharaoh out of Egypt. Listen to these tactics from God. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and camp near Pi Hahiroth between Migdol and the sea. They are to encamp by the sea directly opposite Baal Zephon. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert." Now God knows that when Pharaoh sees them turn back on themselves and camp somewhere else, Pharaoh will see their apparent foolishness and be reminded of his own great wisdom. He will see their apparent weakness and be persuaded of his own great power. And that will be enough to bring him and his armies out of Egypt in pursuit of the Israelites. In verse 5, Pharaoh is musing to himself, "What have we done? We've let the Israelites go and have lost their services." So strange that none of his attendants spoke up in that moment. "Look, Pharaoh, I can give you 10 big reasons why we let them go. Just leave it, okay?" But it seems that they all agree. So he rallies the troops, gets the army ready. He takes 600 of the best chariots along with all the other chariots of Egypt. This is him mustering all the force he's got against this God to see once and for all who is the most powerful between them. Is it the false God that is Pharaoh, or the one true God, the maker of heaven and earth? Well, we will find out. And so Pharaoh has his chariot made ready, and he begins to pursue the Israelites. Look at verse 8. We read that the Israelites at this moment are marching out bold, but see now how their confidence is tied to their circumstances when it ought to be tied to their Saviour. In verse 8, they're confident. Verse 9, here come the Egyptians. Verse 10, the Israelites are terrified. And verse 11, they begin to complain. "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you've brought us out to the desert to die?" They're a sarcastic bunch, aren't they, these Israelites? Moses' reply, though, is about the best thing you could possibly think of him saying. I would be tempted to try and defend myself and say, "Look, you don't understand," or "I was doing my best." Instead, Moses says, "Just trust God, will you? Just trust his deliverance. Wait for God to sort this out." It's a perfect response. Verse 13, "Do not be afraid, stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." He doesn't start drawing up tactics on a chalkboard. He doesn't start giving military direction as if their salvation could be secured by their own strength. He points his people to the source of his hope. Trust God. You can't save yourself, but he can save you. It's exactly the same for you and for me. Our salvation is not brought about by our own skill or strength. The Lord will do it. You need only to be still and trust him. That's exactly right. And so we read exactly what it means for the Lord to deliver the Israelites. Again, a fascinating picture of salvation and faith. God does all the necessary work here. The Israelites do not start grabbing buckets and trying to bail out the Red Sea. God simply divides it. He even dries the land, we read, with an east wind so they can go through on dry ground. They don't even need to get their sandals muddy on the walk. God provides a path of salvation, and now their task is to have enough faith to walk through it. Now, God could have just transported them to the other side of the sea, but that is not what God did. God could have forced each one of them to walk through the walls of water, but that is not what God did. God did everything necessary for salvation, and those who had faith to trust in this provision, they walked through. Now, we're not told of anybody left on the shore We assume they all walked through, but just imagine for a moment, if someone said, look, I refuse to trust this way of salvation, I'd rather trust my own strength. What would have happened to them? They would have been destroyed. And so perhaps the most iconic miracle in the Old Testament, the Israelites walk through the Red Sea with a wall of water on either side of them, and the Egyptians pursue and they are destroyed. The Israelites were not required to defeat their enemies. That was the work of God. The Israelites were not required to save themselves. That was the work of God. The Israelites were required to trust God and act in accordance with that trust. This is a picture of salvation. It is faith that works. And it's beautiful, isn't it? It's a breathtaking picture, but it's just a picture of the greater salvation that you and I have received by trusting in God's provision, his Son slain for us.